This is eternal human spirit, where every story proves why humanity never breaks.
The mockery of fragile lives. The Galactic Council Chamber was a place of light and shadow. It was built with towers of crystal glass that reached the sky. Every wall shone with reflections of alien colors, and the air itself seemed to hum with power. Here the oldest races of the galaxy gathered, beings who measured time not in years but in centuries. Some of them lived so long that even the fall of empires felt like the blink of an eye. To these immortals, the arrival of humanity was a joke. When the human delegation walked into the hall, the aliens laughed. Their voices echoed like storms across the chamber. "So fragile," whispered one scaled creature whose species had never known disease. "So short-lived," hissed another, its long body coiling around a golden throne. A third alien raised its silver eyes and sneered, "Why should a race that dies in less than 100 years sit among us?" The chamber shook with amusement. Captain Elias stood at the front of the human delegation. He was tall by human standards, but compared to the alien giants he looked small. His dark eyes moved across the chamber, seeing the smiles and the mockery. He felt the weight of the insult, but he did not bend. The humans had come not for approval, but for respect. The laughter continued. Some aliens joked that humans must spend half their short lives as children and the other half dying. Others claimed humans could not endure the cold of deep space. "Their bones will break," said one. "Their hearts will fail before they learn the stars." Another added, "They are sparks in the dark, gone before they even shine." Elias kept silent, but his silence was not weakness. Inside, he remembered the faces of human explorers who had crossed burning deserts, frozen seas, and endless skies. He thought of the mothers who raised children in war, of the miners who dug into the black stone of asteroids to feed the colonies. He thought of soldiers who stood on worlds where death waited at every corner. Fragile they were, but fragile things could be unbreakable when their spirit burned. At last, a voice thundered from the highest seat of the chamber. It was the arbiter of the council, a being older than stars. Its body glowed like molten stone. "Humans," it said, "you asked to be recognized as a people of the stars, yet you live so short. What can a race that vanishes in a century teach those who have lived for 1,000 years?" The chamber fell silent for a moment. All eyes turned. To Elias, this was the test, not of strength, but of worth. He stepped forward, his boots striking the shining floor. He looked at the council with steady eyes. "Our lives may be short," Elias said, his voice calm but firm. "But in our short years we learn faster, we love deeper, and we fight harder. Because we know our time is limited, we make every day matter." A low murmur spread through the chamber. Some aliens leaned closer, confused by the words. To them, eternity was natural. Urgency was unknown. They did not understand what it meant to live with the shadow of death. Humans did. And that shadow gave them fire. One alien with skin like liquid metal scoffed. "Empty words. A candle burns bright, but it still dies." Elias did not look away. "Yes," he answered, "but in its light, others see. In its warmth, others survive. And even when it dies, it leaves a memory that never fades." The chamber grew tense. The aliens did not expect defiance, not from a species they thought weak. A silence fell again, broken only by the sound of the arbiter's deep voice. "Very well," it said slowly, "let us see if your fragile kind can prove its words. The trial of ages awaits. If you survive, you will earn your place. If you fall, your race will be forgotten." The council chamber shook with approval. Alien voices rose in cruel delight. To them, this was entertainment, a chance to watch fragile humans fail. The laughter returned, louder, sharper, yet now Elias did not feel the sting. Instead, he felt a spark of fire in his chest. Humans had always been mocked, always been underestimated, but history showed that every time they were pushed down, they rose higher. As the humans left the chamber, the alien laughter followed them like shadows. But Elias did not look back. His people would face the trial. His people would carry the weight of fragile lives, and in that fragility, they would find strength. Somewhere deep inside, he whispered to himself, they will see. They will all see. And thus began the story of how fragile lives would shake the stars, the trial of endurance. The trial of ages was no ordinary challenge. It was a test designed across centuries by the oldest races of the galaxy. It was meant to prove who deserved a place among the stars and who would be forgotten in dust. For alien races that lived for thousands of years, the trial was difficult but not impossible. They had patience. They had endless time to endure. But for humans who measured their lives in short decades, the trial was nothing less than a death sentence. When Captain Elias and his small team of humans were led into the preparation chamber, they saw walls covered with strange symbols glowing in pale blue light. The chamber masters, tall insectoid beings with shining green eyes, explained the rules in voices that buzzed like thunder. The trial is survival, they said. You will be cast into the maze of eternity. There are no maps. There is no end. Only those who endure long enough to be remembered by the Watchers may claim victory. The words sounded cold and merciless. The other alien contestants, beings of long lifespans, looked at the humans with mocking smiles. To them, this was not competition. It was cruelty disguised as tradition. Elias studied his team, a group of explorers, soldiers, and scientists. None of them were older than 40. He could see fear in their eyes, but also fire. He reminded them quietly, "We may not live for centuries, but our strength is not in time. Our strength is in how we use the time we have." His words carried weight, and the team nodded. They had come not to crawl through centuries, but to blaze through moments. The maze of eternity opened with a thunderous sound. Gates carved from obsidian stone split apart, revealing a path of shifting walls and endless darkness. The moment the contestants entered, the maze sealed itself behind them. The council chamber transformed into a viewing hall where alien rulers watched the struggle on great floating screens. Their laughter returned as they saw humans step into the dark. "Fragile sparks," one said. "They will burn out before the first turn." The maze was alive. Its walls moved like breathing flesh, twisting and reshaping. Corridors stretched into infinity, and doors opened only to vanish again. Each step carried danger. Alien contestants who lived for centuries simply waited, resting in corners, conserving their strength. Their patience was their weapon. But for humans, time was never a luxury. Every moment meant motion. Every moment meant choice. Elias and his team did not stop. They pressed forward, marking their paths with crude signs, scratching stone with steel. When the walls shifted, they adapted. When doors closed, they broke them open. They did not wait for time to bend in their favor. They fought against time itself. Their short lives had taught them that standing still was the same as dying. Hours turned into days. The maze unleashed its first true terror. Creatures made of shadow and fire that crawled across ceilings, waiting to devour the weak. The alien contestants hid, using their patience as shields. But the humans did the opposite. They charged, their weapons bright in the darkness. They fought with reckless courage, burning through fear with action. The Watchers in the council chamber gasped as fragile bodies cut through monsters older than suns. "Why do they not hide?" whispered one alien. "Why do they not wait?" an elder answered softly. "Because waiting is death to them." The humans carried wounds, their bodies scarred and bleeding, yet they kept moving. In the darkness of the maze, they sang songs, shared stories, and reminded each other why they fought. One scientist told a tale of her daughter waiting on Earth. A little girl who wanted to see the stars. A soldier whispered of his brother lost in war, swearing never to waste the life he had left. Elias listened and felt their fragile lives becoming stronger than steel. They were not running for themselves. They were running for all of humanity. On the seventh day, the maze unleashed its greatest cruelty. The walls began to collapse, entire sections crushing down like mountains. Many alien contestants froze, calculating, waiting for the safest route, but the humans did not pause. They ran, they leaped, they pulled one another through falling stone. At one point, Elias himself was pinned beneath a shard of wall. His ribs cracked, but his team refused to leave him. They lifted with every ounce of strength, their fragile muscles trembling, and together they broke free. The council watched in disbelief. Fragile beings who should have died on the first day had endured a week of chaos. More than that, they had fought through every storm with fire in it. Their hearts, their short lives gave them desperation, and that desperation turned into unstoppable will. "Impossible," muttered an alien whose race had never known fear. They should have fallen already. But the humans had not fallen. Instead, they reached the heart of the maze, a chamber of silver light where no one was meant to stand so soon. Their arrival shook the council. The maze had been designed for centuries of patience, yet fragile lives had conquered it in mere days. The arbiter's molten eyes flickered with something no one had ever seen before. Doubt. Elias stood tall despite his wounds. His voice echoed in the silver chamber. "We may not live long, but in our short years we endure more than you can. Imagine, we do not waste our lives. We make them count." His words carried through the watchers' screens like fire, and for the first time the laughter of the aliens grew silent. But silence was not victory. The maze had one last secret. A sound rose from the depths, a rumble that shook the walls. The ground split, and from the shadows emerged a swarm of living darkness, creatures older than time, hungering for fragile lives. The true trial had only begun, and the galaxy leaned forward in suspense, wondering if these short-lived humans could survive what even the ancients feared, a flame in the darkness. The swarm rose from the depths like a storm of nightmares. They were creatures made of living shadow, their bodies shifting like smoke, yet striking with claws sharp enough to cut through steel. Their eyes glowed red in the dark, and their endless screeches filled the maze of eternity with a sound like breaking bones. For a moment, even the bravest human felt his blood run cold. Around them, the other alien contestants scattered in terror. Some used their long lifespans to calculate escape routes. Others simply hid, hoping time would protect them. But humans did not hide. They had never been a people of waiting. They had always been a people of fire. Captain Elias raised his weapon, his chest still aching from broken ribs. His voice cut through the chaos. "We don't retreat. We fight. We burn brighter than they can imagine." His words lit sparks in the hearts of his team. Wounded as they were, exhausted as they felt, they drew their weapons and prepared to face the swarm. The aliens watching from the council chamber leaned forward in disbelief. Fragile beings with short lives were choosing battle against an enemy that had slaughtered ancient races. It seemed like madness. And yet there was something in their eyes that no one could name. The swarm charged like a tidal wave. The ground shook under their weight. The air itself seemed to shatter. Humans met them head-on, moving not with patience but with urgency. Their short lives gave them no room for hesitation. Every strike, every shot, every breath had to matter. A soldier leaped onto a shadow beast twice his size and drove his blade into its glowing eye. A scientist threw a makeshift explosive that she had built from scraps of broken tech. The blast tearing a hole through the darkness. Elias himself fought with fury, his weapon cutting through the swarm like a blazing torch in endless night. The council gasped. "This is madness," hissed a scaled noble. "They are destroying themselves." But another alien, old and wise, whispered, "No, they are teaching us." For the first time, the ancient races saw what it meant to live with urgency. To them, time was endless. To humans, time was a storm, and storms demanded action. The battle raged for hours. The swarm poured from every direction, endless and merciless, yet the humans fought with songs on their lips. One soldier sang of Earth's oceans, another shouted of her family waiting in the colonies. They reminded one another of why they lived, of why every fragile breath was worth defending. The more they spoke, the harder they fought. Their words became as sharp as their weapons, filling the maze with fire that the shadows could not extinguish. Elias remembered the voices in the council chamber mocking their short lives. He thought of the arbiter asking what a race with so little time could teach immortals. His answer was now written in blood and flame. Humans could teach that the value of life was not in its length, but in its intensity. Each second of their fight carried more weight than centuries of waiting, but the swarm was endless. For every creature that fell, two more appeared. The humans were bleeding, tired, and yet they did not stop. At one moment, Elias was dragged down by two shadow beasts. Their claws ripped into his armor. Pain seared his body. His team saw him fall and screamed his name. They fought like demons to pull him free. One soldier, a woman named Kara, sacrificed herself to shield Elias. Her scream echoed as the shadows consumed her. Elias rose with fury in his heart, his wounds forgotten. "For Kara," he shouted, and his blade cut through the darkness with a strength born from grief. The watchers in the chamber were silent now. None laughed, none mocked. They stared in awe as fragile creatures who should have broken long ago fought like fire against eternity itself. Some aliens began to whisper, "Perhaps their weakness is their strength." The arbiter remained silent, his glowing eyes fixed on the screens. At last, the humans realized that fighting the swarm forever was impossible. They needed something more. Elias looked at the silver chamber at the heart of the maze and saw the great crystals that powered its shifting walls. He understood, then, the maze itself was feeding the swarm. It was not a natural enemy, it was part of the trial. If they destroyed the crystals, they might weaken the beasts. It was a desperate gamble, but desperation was what humanity had always lived by. "Cover me," Elias ordered, and his team obeyed without question. They fought with everything they had left, forming a shield of flesh and fire around their captain. Elias ran through the storm of shadows, each step agony, each breath burning. He reached the first crystal and drove his weapon deep into it. The explosion of light blinded all, and the swarm screamed as if struck by fire. One crystal shattered, then another. Each time the swarm weakened, their bodies trembling, their screams breaking. The council chamber shook with astonishment. "Impossible," muttered a noble. "They are breaking the maze itself." But no one could deny what they saw. Humans were rewriting the trial, not by patience, not by centuries of waiting, but by action, sacrifice, and unyielding will. At last, Elias struck the final crystal, the chamber erupted in silver light, the swarm shrieked and dissolved into dust. The maze itself trembled and fell silent. For the first time in countless ages, the trial of ages had been broken by those who were never meant to survive. Elias collapsed to his knees, bleeding, exhausted, yet alive. His team stood around him, battered but unbroken. In the council hall, there was no laughter left. The aliens who once mocked now sat in silence, their pride shaken. They had witnessed fragile creatures with short lives burn brighter than stars. The arbiter leaned forward, his molten voice rumbling like thunder. "This is not the end," he said. "The trial has many faces, and you have only seen one. But humanity, perhaps your flame is worth watching." The humans looked at one another, knowing the battle was not over. The maze was quiet for now, but in its silence, new dangers waited. Elias rose to his feet, his voice hoarse but firm. "We are not finished. We will endure." And somewhere in the darkness beyond the chamber walls, a deeper presence stirred, older and more powerful than the swarm, as if the galaxy itself was preparing to test humanity once again. The Queen's wrath. The silence that followed the fall of the swarm was heavy. It felt as if the maze itself was holding its breath. The dust of the destroyed shadow beasts floated through the air like dark snow, and the humans stood together. In the ruined chamber, battered, bleeding, and yet unbroken, they thought for a moment that the trial had ended, that their impossible victory had secured their place in the stars. But the galaxy had far darker secrets waiting in the shadows. From the depths of the maze of eternity came a sound older than memory. It was not the screech of beasts, nor the hum of shifting walls. It was a voice, deep and ancient, filled with fury. The ground trembled, the air thickened, and even the glowing crystals that had not been shattered began to crack under the weight of its presence. The humans felt the sound in their bones, and even the alien rulers in the council chamber leaned back in sudden fear, for they all knew what it meant. The Queen had awakened. The Obsidian Queen was no ordinary creature. She was the mother of the swarm, the will behind the shadows. She had lived for thousands of years, feeding on the life force of every race foolish. Enough to enter the maze, her body rose from the black pit like a mountain of living darkness. Her wings stretched wide, blotting out the light. Her eyes glowed with fire older than stars, and her voice was thunder itself. Fragile sparks, she roared, "You dare wound my children, you dare shatter my eternity." Captain Elias felt his knees weaken as her voice filled the chamber, but he forced himself to stand tall. His body was broken, ribs aching, blood dripping, yet his spirit was iron. His team looked to him, their leader, their anchor in the storm. He met their eyes and gave a single nod. He did not need to speak, for they all knew what it meant. They would fight, no matter what. The council chamber erupted in chaos. Alien nobles who once mocked humanity now whispered in fear. Some begged the arbiter to end the trial, claiming the Queen's release would doom them all. Others demanded that the humans be left to die, insisting they had unleashed this wrath upon themselves. The arbiter remained silent, his molten gaze fixed on the screen. For the first time in centuries, even he did not know the outcome. The Queen moved with terrifying grace. Her wings sent waves of darkness crashing through the chamber, forcing the humans to scatter. Her claws tore through stone as if it were air. Every strike shook the ground. One soldier was caught in the blast. His body flung across the chamber. He cried out but rose again, staggering, refusing to fall. The humans fought back with everything they had, weapons blazing, blades striking, fire and steel against living shadow. Their fragile bodies seemed small before the mountain of darkness, but their will was vast. Elias shouted orders, guiding his team through the storm. "Don't give her space. Keep moving. Don't let fear freeze you." They obeyed, darting between her massive legs, striking at weak points, firing at her eyes. Every blow left a mark, not enough to kill, but enough to show that the Queen was not untouchable. Her roar shook the chamber, walls cracked, and the ceiling rained. Shards of stone. Still the humans pressed on. The Queen laughed, a sound that made even the council tremble. "You burn so bright, but flames always die. Your short lives end in moments. Your sparks vanish in the wind. I will show you the truth of eternity." She unleashed a wave of darkness that swallowed the chamber. For a moment, all light was gone. The humans could not see, could barely breathe. They felt death pressing down on them. Yet in that darkness, something stirred inside Elias. He remembered the words he had spoken in the council chamber, words mocked by the immortals. "Our lives may be short, but we make every day matter." He realized that the Queen was wrong. Eternity was not strength, it was a chain. Humans were free because of their fragility. They were strong because of their mortality. He raised his voice in the blackness, shouting so his team could hear, "We are not eternal. That is our power. We live, we fight, we love, and we die. But in that fire we leave something no darkness can erase." His words gave his team courage, and their weapons blazed like stars in the void. The council fell silent, watching. They saw fragile beings stand against a monster older than their empires, and they could not deny the fire burning in human hearts. Even the arbiter's molten eyes flickered with something rare, perhaps respect. The battle raged on. The queen struck again and again, but humans refused to yield. They fought with desperation, with reckless courage, with the kind of strength born from knowing every breath might be their last. One soldier, bleeding and broken, threw himself beneath the queen's wing and drove a grenade into her flesh. The explosion tore through her body, and for the first time she screamed in pain. Her fire dimmed, her shadow wavered. The humans had drawn blood, but victory was still. Far away, the queen's fury grew greater. Her wings spread wide, casting the chamber into endless night. Her voice thundered, "If you burn so bright, then I will snuff you out myself." And with that, she prepared her final strike, a wave of darkness that could end every fragile life in the chamber. The humans gathered, their bodies weak, their weapons nearly broken, yet their eyes burned brighter than ever. Elias looked at his team and whispered, "If this is the end, then let the galaxy remember how we faced it." They stood together, a wall of fragile flesh and unbreakable spirit, waiting for the storm to fall, and in the council chamber, silence ruled. Every alien leaned forward, knowing that in the next breath they would either witness the death of humanity or the birth of a legend, the legacy of mortality. The queen's wings spread wide like a storm of living night. Her body rose above the humans like a mountain ready to collapse. Her power gathered in waves of black fire, a force strong enough to erase fragile lives in a single breath. The humans stood together, broken and bloodied, yet they did not step back. They knew the next strike could end them all, and yet in their eyes there was no fear, only fire. Captain Elias looked at his team, each face marked with wounds, sweat, and determination. He saw in them the truth of humanity, not the weakness the galaxy mocked, but the strength born from knowing that every life was short, every second mattered, every sacrifice had meaning. He remembered Kara, who had given her life to protect him. He remembered the songs of his people, the stories passed down through generations. He felt the weight of mortality not as a curse but as a gift. Humans did not have centuries to waste, so they lived every day as if it was their last. That urgency, that desperation, was their greatest strength. The queen's roar shook the walls as she unleashed her fury. Darkness swept across the chamber like a tidal wave, swallowing everything in its path. But the humans met it with light. Elias raised his weapon high, shouting, "We are mortal, we are fragile, but our fire will outlast your eternity." His team followed with cries of defiance, igniting their weapons, their explosives, even scraps of technology twisted into desperate tools of survival. The darkness struck them, and for a moment it seemed they would be consumed. But their fire burned brighter, cutting holes through the night, turning shadow into ash. The council chamber was silent. Aliens who had lived for millennia stared in disbelief as fragile beings resisted a force older than the stars. For them, patience was survival. For humans, survival was urgency, progress, sacrifice. They watched and began to understand. These short lives were not weakness. They were lightning. Brief, but powerful enough to split the sky, Elias pressed forward, his ribs still broken, his blood staining the floor. Each step was pain, but pain had always been humanity's companion. It did not stop him. It drove him. He struck at the queen's wing, tearing flesh that had seemed untouchable. His soldiers flanked him, using every tactic they had learned in their brief years: ambush, distraction, unity. They moved with speed that immortals could never match because they had no time to waste. The queen staggered, her voice shaking the chamber. "Why do you resist? You are sparks that die in moments. You cannot defeat me." Elias answered with a voice filled with fire. "Yes, we are sparks, but sparks create flames. Flames create fire. Fire lights the world. Even if we die, our fire will remain." His words struck deeper than his weapon, and even the arbiter leaned forward, his molten eyes flickering as if seeing truth in the fragile captain's defiance. The humans did not fight only with weapons. They fought with memory, with love, with sacrifice. One scientist remembered her daughter waiting on Earth, and that thought gave her strength to hurl another explosive at the queen's heart. A soldier thought of his fallen brother, and that memory fueled his charge into the darkness. Every human carried the weight of mortality, and in that weight was power no immortal could comprehend. At last, the queen stumbled, her vast body shaking. Her wings cracked, her fire dimmed. She screamed in rage and pain. For the first time in her endless life, she felt the sting of true defeat. Fragile beings who should have been nothing more than dust had carved wounds into her eternal flesh. Yet still she was not finished. She gathered what remained of her. Power, preparing one final strike. A blast that would consume not only the humans but the entire maze. Elias understood what was coming. He knew they could not withstand it, not as they were. His eyes swept over his team, and he felt the weight of leadership heavier than ever. Someone had to make the choice. Someone had to burn brighter than all the rest. His heart pounded as he realized what had to be done. The legacy of mortality was sacrifice. It was the willingness to give everything so that others could live. He turned to his team, his voice low but steady. "This is not about surviving. This is about proving who we are. If one flame can burn bright enough, it can light the galaxy forever." They stared at him, understanding what he meant. Fear flickered in their eyes, but so did pride, for this was humanity's way. Fragile lives that burned so fiercely they left scars on eternity. Elias charged forward alone. His team shouted in protest, but he did not stop. His broken body moved with a strength born from purpose. The queen focused her power on him, her eyes blazing. He leapt, climbing her massive form, driving his weapon. Into her wounds, his voice roared, "For humanity, for every fragile life that burns." He triggered the last of their explosives strapped to his armor. The chamber erupted in a storm of fire and shadow. The queen screamed, her body collapsing. In fury and pain, the blast tore through her heart, shattering her ancient strength. The maze shook as if the universe itself cried out. Dust and fire consumed the air. When the light faded, the queen lay broken, her wings torn, her voice silent. Elias was gone. His body had been consumed by the fire, but his spirit remained, etched into every human who stood to witness his sacrifice. The council chamber was silent. None laughed, none mocked. They had seen fragile beings rise against eternity and win, not through strength of body but through strength of spirit. The arbiter finally spoke, his voice deep and slow. They live short lives, but in those lives they achieve what others cannot in centuries. Perhaps their fragility is their greatest power. The humans stood in the ruined chamber, tears mixing. With blood, they had lost their leader, but his legacy burned in their hearts. They were not weak, they were not meaningless. They were proof that even short lives could shake the stars. Yet in the silence after the queen's fall, a tremor ran through the maze. A new sound rose from the depths, deeper and darker than before, as if something even older than the queen had been watching, waiting. Humanity had won a battle, but the war for their place in the galaxy was only beginning. The sacrifice that shook the stars. The ruins of the queen's body still smoldered. Her black wings lay twisted across the chamber floor, her fire extinguished, her voice silenced. The humans stood around the ashes, trembling with exhaustion, blood running down their wounds, yet alive. Their captain, Elias, was gone. His sacrifice had ended the Queen's reign of terror. His flame had burned so bright it consumed the darkness. But the silence that followed was not peace, it was the silence before another storm. The maze of eternity shook as if awakening from a deep slumber. The walls cracked, the floor split apart, and the very air grew heavy with unseen power. From the depths, a voice far older. Then the Queen rose. It was not filled with rage, but with something worse, cold indifference. It was the voice of the void itself, the ancient force that had created the trials, a being that cared nothing for life, short or long. Its words rolled across the chamber like a tide of shadows. One flame has fallen, but sparks do not defy. The eternal void, your kind is still dust, destined to vanish. The humans staggered as the sound filled their bones. They looked at one another, grief still raw from Elias's loss, fear rising again as they realized the trial was not over. The Queen had only been a guardian, but behind her stood something far greater. Yet in their fear was also fire. Elias's sacrifice had left them with more than sorrow. It had left them with a reason to fight. His last words echoed in their hearts, reminding them that short lives, though fragile, could burn brighter than stars. The void began to shape itself into form. At first it was nothing but endless blackness. Then it grew into a giant, taller than the Queen, its body like liquid shadow, shifting, stretching, bending into shapes that defied reason. Its eyes were endless pits. Its hands were claws large enough to crush armies. It did not roar like the Queen. It did not rage. It simply existed. A force so ancient that even the council members in their chamber trembled in awe. "This is no trial," one alien whispered. "This is annihilation." The humans raised their weapons, though their strength was nearly gone. Their bodies shook, their lungs burned, and yet they did not lower their arms. Elias's sacrifice had shown them the path. If one fragile life could shatter an eternal monster, then together their flames might stand even against the void. They pressed closer, shoulder to shoulder, bloodied hands gripping steel and fire. They whispered to one another, reminding themselves of their homes, their families, the dreams they carried. Every word turned fear into courage. Every memory turned pain into strength. The void struck without warning. Its shadow arms lashed forward, tearing stone apart. The humans scattered, diving. For cover, one soldier fired a plasma rifle, the shot ripping through the air and striking the giant, but the blast vanished into its darkness, swallowed whole. "It cannot be hurt," another shouted, despair heavy in his voice. Yet the scientist among them shook her head, her eyes fierce. "No, Elias taught us. It's not about how long we fight. It's about how we fight. We find the light inside the darkness." Her words steadied them. The council chamber was silent. Aliens who had mocked humanity now leaned forward, unable to look away. They had seen a captain sacrifice himself, and now they watched his people rise again, fragile, weak, bleeding, but unbroken. One noble whispered, "They should have died, long ago, yet still they stand. Why?" The arbiter did not answer. His molten eyes were fixed on the screen, as if searching for an answer himself. The humans charged. Their short lives gave them no time to wait. Every strike was reckless, every move desperate. They climbed the shadow giant, slashing at its limbs, planting explosives against its shifting body. It roared with the sound of collapsing worlds, but still they clung to it, fighting with every ounce of life left. For them, this was not just survival. This was legacy. This was proof that mortality itself could defy eternity. One soldier was caught in the giant's hand, his body crushed, but before he died he pulled the pin on his grenade. His sacrifice tore a hole in the shadow's chest. Another soldier fell to darkness but used his last breath to ignite his weapon. In the creature's eye, each fragile life became a spark. Each spark became fire, and together those fires began to tear through the void. The humans sang as they fought, voices cracking yet unyielding. Songs of earth, of oceans and skies, songs of children waiting at home, songs of fallen friends who had given their lives. Their voices echoed across the chamber and even into the council, where alien rulers felt something stir in their ancient hearts. For the first time in ages, they felt envy, not for the shortness of human lives, but for the meaning they carried. At the center of the storm, Elias's memory burned brightest. His sacrifice gave his people the strength to rise again and again. Though his body was gone, his spirit marched beside them, guiding their hands, steadying their hearts. They fought not as immortals who had centuries to waste, but as mortals who knew that every heartbeat mattered. The void struck with endless fury, yet with each strike more sparks rose, each human flame burned until nothing was left, but in burning they left scars on eternity. At last, the shadow giant faltered. The humans had torn holes in its body, light bleeding from wounds it could not close. It roared in fury, but its voice wavered. The fragile sparks had done the impossible. They had shaken the eternal. The chamber shook with the sound of collapse. The void stumbled back into the pit, its form unraveling into dust. The humans stood barely alive, their numbers few, their weapons broken. But they had endured. They had done what no other race had dared. In the council chamber, silence ruled. Then, slowly, voices rose, not in laughter, not in mockery, but in awe. The arbiter's molten eyes burned brighter than ever, his voice rumbled like thunder. One man's sacrifice lit a fire that no darkness could consume. His people carried that fire, and together they shook the stars, fragile lives, yet unbreakable spirits. The humans fell to their knees, breathing ragged. Their bodies were broken, but their hearts burned. They had survived the wrath of the queen. They had faced the void, and through sacrifice and unity they had proven a truth the galaxy could no longer deny. Humanity's short years were not weakness. They were the greatest power of all. Yet even as the dust of the void faded, a final tremor shook the maze. From beyond the broken chamber came a whisper, not of anger, not of rage, but of recognition. Something older than even the void had heard the fire of fragile lives, and it was watching, waiting. Humanity had won this battle, but the war for their place among the stars was only beginning. The eternal flame. The maze of eternity lay in ruins. Its once shifting walls were broken, its endless corridors shattered by fire and sacrifice. The air was heavy with the scent of ash and the echo of battles fought. The humans stood among the wreckage, their bodies trembling, their armor cracked, their weapons little more than scraps, yet their eyes burned with a light that no shadow could extinguish. They had survived where none expected survival. They had endured trials meant to erase them, and in doing so they had shown the galaxy the truth of fragile lives. The council chamber was silent. The rulers of ancient races sat frozen in awe. Their laughter was gone, their mockery silenced. They had watched fragile beings bleed, break, and sacrifice, and yet still rise. They had seen sparks burn until they became fire, and that fire had burned even the void. Some of the rulers whispered among themselves, their voices uneasy. How can such short lives endure what immortals cannot? Others simply stared, their pride shaken, their certainty destroyed. Only the arbiter moved, leaning forward, his molten eyes burning with strange intensity. Step forward. His voice rumbled, and the words echoed into the ruins of the maze. The surviving humans lifted their heads, hearing the command. They staggered, each step heavy, but they obeyed. They had fought through death, through darkness, through despair. Now they stood before the gaze of the oldest council in the galaxy. Their numbers were few, but their spirit was vast. Elias was gone. Yet his fire lived in every one of them. The arbiter spoke again, his voice slow, measured. We mocked your fragility. We laughed at your short lives. We called you sparks that vanish before they shine. And yet, you have shaken the stars. You have faced the swarm, the queen, the void, and you have endured. What do you say, humans? What do you claim now? A silence followed, broken only by the heavy breaths of the survivors. Then one soldier stepped forward, his voice rough with pain but steady. We claim nothing, he said. We prove who we are. We are mortal, yes. We are fragile, yes. But in our short lives, we live more than centuries of waiting. We love deeper, we fight harder, and when we fall, we leave behind fire that others carry. We do not ask to be remembered. We make ourselves unforgettable. The council stirred. Some lowered their eyes, ashamed of their earlier laughter. Others nodded slowly, as if finally seeing what had been hidden all along. The arbiter raised his hand, and silence returned. His molten gaze swept over the survivors. And then his voice thundered, "Then so be it. Humanity shall not be forgotten. Humanity shall not be mocked. You live short lives, but your fire is eternal. The council recognizes you as a people of the stars." The humans stood taller, though tears burned their eyes. They had not fought for recognition. They had fought because it was their way, to live and to burn. Yet the words carried weight. For the first time in history, the galaxy acknowledged that fragile lives had strength beyond measure. But the arbiter's voice did not end there. It grew darker, heavier as he spoke again. Yet beware, sparks of fire. You have awakened forces older than the void. Your victory has been seen, and not all who watch will welcome you. Some will fear you. Others will hate you. For fire is not only light, it is also destruction. Be ready, for your true trial is yet to come. The survivors felt the truth of his words. Somewhere beyond the stars, they sensed it too. A presence watching, waiting, testing. Humanity's battle was not the end, but the beginning. Yet, instead of fear, a strange determination filled their hearts. They had faced the impossible and survived. They had lost Elias. But his spirit burned in them, guiding their path. If greater trials awaited, then they would face them as they had always faced the dark, together, burning bright. When they returned to Earth, the story spread like wildfire. Across colonies, across ships, across every corner of human space, people spoke of the fragile delegation that had defied the galaxy. They told of the trial of ages, of the swarm, of the queen, of the void, and of Elias who had given his life. They sang songs of short lives that burned so bright they shook eternity. Children who heard. The stories dreamed not of living forever, but of living fully, of making every day matter. Humanity itself was changed. Their fragility was no longer seen as weakness, but as strength. In the centuries to come, other races would tell the tale too. They would speak of the day when fragile sparks defied the stars. Some would tell it with respect, others with fear, for the fire of short lives could inspire but also threaten. Immortals who once laughed now remembered, and in their memory burned the truth. Fragile lives were dangerous, because they had nothing to lose but everything to give. And so the legend of the eternal flame was born. Humanity, the race of short years and fragile bodies, had become something greater. They had become the fire that could never be erased. In every council chamber, in every hall of power, their name was spoken with awe. In every home, in every heart, their story was whispered as a promise. We are mortal, but our spirit is eternal. Yet in the far reaches of the galaxy, in places where light had never touched, something stirred. The presence that had watched humanity's rise smiled in the dark, for it knew that sparks that burned so bright would one day ignite a fire large enough to challenge even the gods. Humanity's story was not finished. It had only just begun.
Thank you for joining Eternal Human Spirit, where humanity always rises again.